What is forgiveness? Does forgiving make us better human beings? Do we have the right to forgive someone on behalf of others? Hello everyone, and welcome to another brand new episode on my channel, Wonder Boho Book Club. Today I'll be summarizing the book, The Sunflower, on the possibilities and limits of forgiveness, written by Simone Wiesenthal. Simone Wiesenthal was a Jewish Austrian Holocaust survivor and writer. In The Sunflower, Wiesenthal recounts his experience with a mortally wounded Nazi during World War II. He describes his experience in the Lemberg concentration camp and discusses the moral ethics of the decisions he made. The book also contains distinguished men and women's responses to Wiesenthal's questions about forgiveness and its limits. Many of these people being theologians, political leaders, writers, jurists, psychiatrists, human rights activists, Holocaust survivors, and victims of attempted genocides in Bosnia, Cambodia, China, and Tibet. Their responses remind us that the road to understanding has many twists and turns, as diverse as individual experiences, and that Wiesenthal's questions are not confined to events of the past. They remain relevant in today's world. Before moving ahead, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Part 1. Memories Etched in Our Soul. While World War II was wreaking havoc all over Europe in the early 1940s, many Europeans were struggling to survive. One such person was Simone Wiesenthal, who was held at the Lemberg concentration camp in German-occupied Poland. Wiesenthal and his fellow prisoners had to scrape by with almost no food, fearing the worst all the time. Unexpectedly, one day, Wiesenthal was met with a different philosophical dilemma. He was sent to work at a hospital and ended up meeting a nurse who introduced him to Karl Seidel, a Nazi soldier. Seidel was fatally wounded. He wanted to atone for his sins and confess his crimes to a Jew before he died. This was a surreal moment for Wiesenthal, as he had to listen to Karl Seidel's confession, one of the people responsible for the torture and genocide of Jewish people. Karl Seidel was born to a loving and supportive family, his father being an anti-Nazi socialist. But as a young man, Seidel became involved with the Hitler Youth and later the SS. Seidel described those of his deeds that haunted him the most. In a small Russian town where Seidel was stationed, 300 Jews were ordered to gather in one building. They included mostly women, children, and the elderly. The soldiers then locked the building from outside and set it on fire, killing each and every person inside. As Seidel lay in his deathbed, he said he wanted to die in peace, so he asked Wiesenthal if he could forgive him. It was no easy choice for Wiesenthal, as the situation demanded a careful weighing of the pros and cons of forgiveness. So what was Wiesenthal to do? Part 2. Forgiveness doesn't come easily for many. After Seidel had finished telling Wiesenthal the story, Wiesenthal decided he didn't want to explicitly forgive the dying soldier. Though Seidel was describing massacres and horrific crimes, Wiesenthal remained focused and present throughout the confession. He did not express anger or spite at all. Back in the concentration camp, Wiesenthal related the story to his friends, fellow inmates, and others, who assured him that he did the right thing by not forgiving Hitler's soldier. One friend was convinced that Wiesenthal would have been the one at fault if he had forgiven Seidel. Another thought that forgiving him would have been a totally reasonable thing to do, since the Christian doctrine basically allows forgiveness to everyone who asks for it. While talking to Seidel, Wiesenthal also happened to notice Seidel's mother's home address on a letter the soldier had written. When the war was finally over and Wiesenthal was free again, he decided to visit Seidel's mother in Germany. While talking to Wiesenthal, Seidel's mother reminisced about Seidel being kind and helpful as a child, and she remained firm in her beliefs that he had never harmed any Jew and remained true to his Christian upbringing. Wiesenthal decided not to tell Mrs. Seidel what her son had done. Instead, he allowed her to maintain this idealized vision of him. But the incident left a lasting impression on Wiesenthal, and he began to wonder if he did the right thing. Part 3. Arguments against forgiveness. Some people aren't satisfied with simply regretting a wrongdoing and want to be able to do something to make it right. This is also true in the Jewish culture, where murder is never forgiven. Judaism believes that only those perpetrators forgiven by the victims themselves can be forgiven by God. But if a person has been killed, then he is not able to forgive the perpetrator, and even God can't forgive the perpetrator. The choice Seidel had was whether to carry out the murders or not. His confession provides absolutely no indication that he would have stopped murdering Jews if he hadn't been so gravely wounded. Even on his deathbed, Seidel viewed Jews as a group of people rather than individual human beings with feelings and emotions. Seidel asked his nurse to bring him any Jew, as if they are not individuals. When Wiesenthal arrived at the hospital, Seidel didn't ask him anything about himself, his personal suffering, or even his name. This shows the dominance of racist ideologies that were common during the time of Nazism. Some people say that Carl Seidel wasn't born evil. Maybe he wasn't, but later on in life, he did perform some evil acts, which makes his deeds even more unforgivable. He chose to reject the way of kindness and compassion and instead turned towards hatred and violence. Perhaps the author's silence was a perfect response to Seidel's confessions. It showed real compassion, but did not allow Seidel to feel easily unburdened of how wrong his actions were. To listen to more interesting summaries, please subscribe to my channel. Part 4. Arguments in favor of forgiveness. Some people think that forgiveness means forgetting or condoning a crime. That is not true. Forgiveness means moving forward without holding on to the past. Burden of responsibility is also a big concern here. While Seidel and many others had done horrific things, it is relatively forgiving compared to the deeds of the masterminds who devised the murderous plan of Nazi Germany. Apart from reducing anger and hate, forgiveness can also allow us to let go of old issues and move on. Forgiveness can turn grief, resentment into compassion. If a guilty person has true remorse and a change of heart, then they are deserving of forgiveness. Without forgiveness, you don't get to end the cycle of resentment, which in turn creates new suffering. To build a peaceful future, one must learn to forgive. Part 5. Forgiveness is highly subjective. As we can see, the arguments both for and against forgiveness are pretty strong. For Wiesenthal, trying to understand forgiveness requires seeing it from different perspectives. For example, Jewish and Christian traditions have entirely different perceptions on forgiveness. While Christianity holds the view that God loves everyone, even the sinners, Judaism needs the victim to forgive the sinner first, in order for God to forgive the sinner as well. But whether you believe in Judaism or Christianity, one must avoid the idea that sins can be committed and then washed away later just by asking for forgiveness by God. This shows that there is no easy answer, but it's important to keep asking questions in order to find the best course of action for each of us. We should ask ourselves questions like, how did a kind boy like Seidel grow up to commit such atrocities against humanity? Why do our societies uphold ideologies like Nazism and crimes like genocide? Can or should Wiesenthal forgive this man on behalf of all Jewish people? The line between individual and collective guilt is debatable. Wiesenthal's silence on being asked for forgiveness was a reflection on the complexities of life and humanity. It showed that nobody can truly ever hope to understand what it is like to make such an impossible decision. Conclusion. Forgiveness is messy. It's always debatable as to who has the right to forgive and who has the right to be forgiven. Simon Wiesenthal reminds us that when it comes to forgiveness, there are no easy answers. Also, the conversations we have around forgiveness are a valuable way to explore its limits. Ultimately, the only conclusion is that there is no conclusion. All we need to do is keep asking ourselves about our ideologies and motives behind our actions. Thank you for watching this episode. Please don't forget to subscribe. Your likes, comments and shares are highly appreciated. See you soon in our next episode.